It's funny how ugly new things are just ugly, but ugly old things, as humans say, have character. Certainly, if it was ugly before, it is still ugly a few years later. No? Though Xander supposed some things did age like fine wine. Visiting this place was one of those things. An old cabin sitting in the middle of an open field deep in a pine forest. A truly rickety old building, with peeling paint on the siding that was supposed to be red, but now has dulled to a muddy brown. The railing to a small porch had visible cracks in the wood, and even the shingles were uneven. Each step creaked as if it was about to break in half. As Xander entered, the familiar smell of dust and old books filled his lungs. He exhaled it with a satisfied sigh, taking his top hat off and hanging it on the rack, followed by placing his cane, the top of which resembled a bat with slightly parted wings, beside it. Although it was past the age, he insisted on wearing a nice suit with a modern take on a shoulder cape clasped together by a silver chain. Luckily, his appearance of a well-kept man in his 70s made humans assume he was simply a very old-school, refined, maybe a little eccentric gentleman, so he rarely got much flack for it on his excursions. "You look just like I remember," a cheerful crinkled with age voice called from the tacky floral couch in the middle of the room. It stood on the opposite side of a fireplace that currently sat unlit, taking up the majority of small living space. Past it, one could see the kitchen with old appliances and a rusty spiral staircase to the loft where the only bedroom was. "So just as old," Xander smiled, making his way further in. "Just as insufferable," she scoffed. "Come in. I have wine." Xander approached the couch with an anticipating smirk, but it fell the moment his eyes landed on his friend. "Carmen," he breathed out slowly. "Oh, don't look at me like that." She waved her hand at him. "It's just cancer." Carmen was a woman late in her years. Her hair, gray with black streaks, and eyes a vibrant shade of blue. She always had this virility about her, getting older but remaining just as beautiful, managing to wear the crow's feet around her eyes with pride, and the pronounced nipples below her cheeks only added to her allure. That was how Xander remembered her from the last time they met 2 years ago. Right here, right in this cabin, with a few less layers of dust. They had some fun, talked, drank, made breakfast in the morning, and parted. Until next time. Next time came far too late, because the beautiful features of Carmen turned hollow, weak, and unassuming, despite her attitude remaining as fiery as always. Yet that was not what stopped Xander in his tracks. It was the small figure of a child behind her, shadowy, with the black leather wings like that of a bat. Xander glanced at it before returning his gaze to Carmen. "When?" he asked both her and Death. "Don't know," the woman responded, leaning over to pour herself another glass of wine, and one more for him. Death raised two clawed fingers in the air. Xander took a deep breath, a surprise, certainly. He did not think this would happen so soon, but all humans die eventually. He had gotten used to it by now. It was the way of things. With grace unfitting to an elderly man, he bent over at the waist to pick up the glass, swirling it twice by the stem, then taking a whiff. "Minot, France, the year we met," he called out. "On the money, as always," Carmen agreed, watching him lower himself on the other side of the couch. "That was a fun trip. We got into quite a bit of trouble in Venice. I am still not allowed in that bar. That was what, 30 years ago now?" "Just about. You went back to check and didn't invite me?" Xander said with fake offense as he lowered himself on the other end of the couch. "No. My granddaughter went and they thought she was me and tried to kick her out. You would not believe how upset she was with me on the phone," she clarified. Xander laughed at the visual of Carmen listening to her granddaughter rant on the call about how her grandmother was so irresponsible in her youth. "She does look a lot like you." "She does." Carmen took a big gulp of the wine, then lifted the glass up to the light, looking through the red liquid. "Acts nothing like me, though." "Is that a bad thing?" "As a proud grandmother, I'm supposed to say no." She sighed, bringing the glass back down to her chest. "But as myself, gosh darn, I really wish at least one of my children was a troublemaker like me." Xander hummed, "And yet, you never had any more." "I sure tried to get your donation enough times." Carmen slurped her wine aggressively. "I've told you that I can't." he pointed out, for probably as many times as they have reunited over the years. Carmen swallowed, then exhaled all that frustration. I know, but can you blame an old senile woman? You are far from either of those things. He threw her an accusatory look while bringing the wine to his lips. Perhaps, she responded in a way that made it obvious she disagreed. The room fell into a heavy silence as they sipped on their drinks. The dust that was raised by Xander's entrance slowly fell back down, creating light rays through the partially opened curtains. He didn't begrudge her for the effort. After all, he never elaborated why he can't, much to Carmen's frustration. His kind could not even have children. That is not how cryptfolk came to be. It was a story he could not tell due to his duty to keep it secret. Xander also had to admit a child of theirs would be a troublemaker indeed, maybe more than is reasonable. Alas, that is not how the dominoes fell. So he drank his wine, letting the awkward tension dissipate on its own. Just as he thought it was gone, Carmen spoke up again. I am afraid, she admitted. Xander glanced at Death behind her once more, who has been standing still this whole time, patiently waiting. There is nothing to be afraid of, child, he replied automatically. Carmen snickered. Only you can call me that and not make it sound like an insult. Only then did Xander realize his mistake, a slip-up. To him, if one were to compare age alone, she truly could be a child. He had gotten used to calling all those who came to the village his children, despite many of them also being hundreds of years old. It was out of the duty he felt to care for them. Some came to be, and he or other cryptfolk found them on their excursions to the human towns. Others, Xander was the one to lead their ghosts to a spirit of their own to merge with, something his unique abilities allowed him to do. It is not meant as one, he breathed out, not even bothering to worry since the slip-up won't matter for long. No? Carmen nodded, finishing her glass. Do you ever wonder what is waiting for us in the end? Something else. Xander looked down at his own reflection in the dregs of wine. Something that is not this. Carmen rolled her eyes, snatching the bottle from the table. Very helpful. For what it is worth, I think it is a good place, he added, hoping to actually be helpful, despite how futile he had found it in the past. And why is that? She challenged him, pouring a hefty dose of wine. Xander pondered how to respond, his gaze wandering to behind the couch. Once again, Death raised its hand, this time with one finger up. A part of me just knows death is not meant as a punishment, but rest. I think it's the end of all hope, Carmen whispered, still holding the bottle in one hand and the wine glass in the other. Why would it be? Xander downed the rest of his portion, raising the glass upside down in a completely undignified fashion. It's the end. No more. Nothing. Can't do anything if you are dead. No hope for being better, for fixing your mistakes, for... A tear fell from the corner of her eye, becoming anyone else. A familiar itch of annoyance scratched at Xander's nape, settling and disappearing as quickly as it came. Death shifted behind Carmen, echoing the sentiment. His spirit ever was the prickly type, or perhaps petulant was the better word. He placed his glass down on the table, then inclined on the couch, offering his embrace to Carmen instead of words, which she took after drinking the whole glass in one go and placing both it and the bottle back on the table, scooting closer to him and leaning on his shoulder. Xander has seen this enough times by now to know what humans wanted. She cried softly for a while, but then wiped her tears with the back of her hands, her voice finding purchase again. On the counter, there is an envelope. It's the deed to this cabin and a copy of my will. It's yours. You don't think your grandchildren will want it? He raised an eyebrow, looking down at her. She barked with a wet laugh. God, no, they hate me. Why would they want this place? Just more taxes for them to pay. It would just be another burden I am leaving behind for them. I doubt they hate you. Gently, Xander stroked her shoulder with his fingertips, letting them linger briefly each time he switched directions. I was not a good grandmother, Carmen stated solemnly. Did you raise your daughter to be strong, to be independent, to teach her to be her own person unapologetically, and never to dim her shine for anyone else? He spoke sternly, but his voice was soft. When Carmen didn't respond, he continued, You taught your own son how to hold his own in a fight, and you were there when each of your grandchildren drank too much for the first time. Weren't you? I was, but then how did you fail? I left them with debt, made them bail me out of jail twice. I was not the responsible adult figure I should have been. One of those was my fault, Xander countered. And wasn't the second time because the guy was stalking your son? That's besides the point, isn't it? Or did somewhere along the way the point became less about who you are and more about what the world thinks you should be? There was no immediate response, and Xander knew he had won. Since when are you all wise, you old bat? Carmen suddenly swatted at his chest. Xander burst out in a hearty laugh. Oh, so now you admit I'm old. Only because you were getting all wise-ass sage on me, just without the beer belly. Would it help if I acquired one? He patted his stomach experimentally. I have been telling you that I am pretty wise for ages. Probably not. It's just too hard to believe when coming from the man who decorated the Winston Churchill statue with cake icing, she pointed out, making the memory flash in his mind's eye. One of his better ideas, if he did say so himself. He smirked, a bit of levity entering his heart. Quickly dashed by a palm on his shoulder, he turned around to see Death had made its way around the couch, their faces meeting and understanding. Xander adjusted to pull Carmen closer, her body warm against his. She curled up, fully cuddling into him until he was forced to turn slightly to allow her to rest on his chest. Thank you, she murmured weakly, closing her eyes and folding her hands like a pillow underneath her ear. But of course. He pressed a kiss at the top of her head. Death's grip on his shoulder disappeared as he was left with just this moment, which he allowed to pass, letting 1 second flow into the next without resistance. He looked down at the woman who was now barely breathing. If there ever was a human who he was tempted to take as a mate, it would have been her. But he never did. He enjoyed her company, appreciated her mind and sharp wit, and wished for her happiness. But to bind his soul to hers, to forsake his duties to those of the village, never once. Though despite not being a crypt folk herself, he treated her as one of his own. To him, she was one of the villagers in spirit. Carmen inhaled sharply, her body shuddered, tightening up briefly before the final breath left her. Xander waited. There was a chance that if she longed for life enough, her soul would appear before him rather than death. 1 minute passed, then another. But when the air in front of Xander flickered like a broken television, it was only the bat-like child that appeared. So she went on? He asked, already knowing the answer. She did. The child spoke with an ethereal echo. She will play with me. There is no need for you to lead her to a spirit of her own. So there will be no more crypt folk born today. Xander nodded, and Death was gone once more. He poured the last of the wine and leaned back on the couch, allowing Carmen's body to remain on him for a while longer. The fading light has become orange, the sun having crept halfway below the horizon. The cabin walls reflected it back at him, as if in reminder to remember the warmth where there was none now. After finishing the glass, he stood up, gently lowering Carmen on the couch. He flicked his hand, and his cane flew from the entrance right into his palm. He twirled it once, letting it hit the ground with a dull thud. Dark shadows erupted from the handle, enveloping his hands, turning them into 2-pronged claws. His shoulder cape crept towards the ground, becoming a swooping cloak of pitch-black leather. The kindly features of his face were replaced with glowing green eyes and a fanged mouth. Gliding more so than walking, he made his way to the counter, atop which the deed and will lay. He raised one arm to open the inside of his cape, picked up the envelope with his fingers, then put them inside of the folds, making them disappear seemingly from existence. Using the same unhurried movements, Xander went outside where the night was falling, stashing the wine bottle and glasses on the way. He found a good spot a couple of dozen feet away from the building, and out of his cape he took a shovel, which he kept with him for just such occasions, and began to dig. It cut through the ground like butter, quickly making a large pit. He returned into the cabin and stood observing Carmen's body for a moment. She looked like she was taking a well-deserved nap. With care and respect, he carried her to the hole and placed her inside. Then he rummaged in the folds of his cape again, looking for a tree seed he thought suited her. He had a few. Maple was meant for priestesses, crypt folk who have learned traditions and magic of the village. Birch was for those who died soon after manifesting. Ash was for warriors who died in battle. Willows were for elders, which one becomes by being alive long enough to have been there when every current alive resident of the village came into being. Chiefs were buried under oak. Those who fit into multiple categories would choose one before their death, or have one chosen for them by their closest advisors. He should have given Carmen an olive tree, which was for human allies of the crypt folk, but he always did have a tendency to pick favorites. So he chose one of the willow seeds and placed it atop her body before burying it all. May your soul find peace, my friend. We shall meet again one day, Xander said, looking over the turned-up mound of dirt. He thought of her children and grandchildren. If he should send them a letter telling them she was gone. He decided against it. If they knew her at all, they would assume she left on one of her benders again. A last hurrah before her death. They would allow her the peace, and know in their hearts she did it to spare them the pain of watching her wither away. Not knowing her death would be sudden and soon. If they didn't, it was the regret and lack of closure to shoulder. Just then, a brilliantly orange fox darted out of the woods and directly towards him. It approached with no fear, circled him once, brushing her whole body against the bottom of his cape, and raised a single dainty black paw at him. Chief Vienna? He recognized it immediately as one of the shifting forms the current chief of the village could take. Only she had eyes that yellow, fur like fire, and paws so inky black. To what do I owe the pleasure of you coming all the way out here to find me? The fox became enveloped in a dark fog, out of which came a woman with short red bob, a luscious figure, and a foxtail swishing back and forth behind her. "Hello, Elder Xander," she said, her voice dark and luxurious, constantly carrying a note of knowing far more than she let on. The movement of her tail created exactly 9 faintly glowing afterimages, creating a hypnotic metronome effect that was hard to look away from. There has been a situation. A new cryptfolk, a male, stumbled right into the village, confused and disoriented. Powerful. He's going to need more help than I can give him alone. Ha! Xander chuckled, his fanged mouth spreading into a Cheshire grin. What is it? She flicked her tail in curious amusement. Oh, nothing. The elder sighed. It's just nice to be wrong once in a while. Vienna glanced over him in the pile of dirt, then returned her yellow-eyed gaze to him. I see. Quite the coincidence. Yes, quite. Xander agreed, then mentioned for them to start moving with the ends of his cape. Well, come. Nothing more to do here for now. Normally this place would be days' worth of travel from the village, but Vienna's abilities allowed her to shorten that time to mere minutes. Once more, in front of him appeared the vibrant fox which dashed across the field. He followed with large measured steps until they reached the edge of the forest. There, Vienna jumped right into a foxhole. Xander looked back at the cabin once more, standing lonely and proud in the moonlight. It had character. He then transformed into a small bat with large green eyes and flew after the fox into the dark abyss.